Welcome back, and welcome into this episode of the Metroid Dread Reimagined soundtrack. It's been a blast getting here, and I'm really excited to get into it with you all. If you're new here, this is a series where we're going through the Metroid Dread soundtrack and reimagining the things I felt could have been improved. Today we're looking at the final main area of the game, Hanubia. So without further ado, welcome to Arcade Redux. Before we start, for those wondering, while this is the last main area of Metroid Dread, this won't be the last video in the series. There are some additional parts of the soundtrack that I'll be looking at, including some of the boss themes, and even a few of the minor ambient touches like save stations and map stations. And after I feel satisfied with a few of those finishing touches, we'll be closing the book on this project and releasing it in mod form for your enjoyment to experience the game with this version of the soundtrack. But for now, let's take a look at Hanubia, the penultimate piece of Samus's journey through ZDR. Let's start by looking at the original piece composed for this area. Similarly to how I would describe my stance toward much of the rest of the Dread soundtrack, I have mixed feelings about this one. There are elements that I like and elements that I don't as much, and the best way I can break it down is just by saying that if you zoom out and look at the forest of this track and not the trees, I really appreciate it. I appreciate the tone of Hanubia and how it fits into the scope of the game. I see a couple different things happening here that I think the track is attempting to accompany. On one hand, Hanubia represents an achievement of Samus's efforts to reach the surface of the planet. There's a sense of resolution after hours of battling and fighting your way to reach the place where Samus began this journey many hours ago. But that sense of completion is coupled with another sensation, which is the anticipation and suspense of finally coming face to face with the main antagonist. And again, I think the forest of this track, if you will, does a good job of bringing those two emotions together. I really like the instrumentation chosen. To me, there's a great use of timpani and pizzicato strings that begin the track. And it immediately gives you that nervous anticipation of something yet to come. And I also think the decision to use longer, sustained choral and string parts to make up the focal point of the music is a great choice, and it adds to the tension that's building at this point in the game. But to me, when you look closer and at the trees of the Hanubia original track, I think it's a little lacking. And it's really not a big surprise if you've heard my thoughts on the previous parts of the soundtrack, but I just don't love the chords being used. Like most of the rest of Dread's OST, there's a heavy, almost exclusive dosage of non-diatonic harmony in this. And while I don't think it sounds grating, I do think that there's not enough variety in the harmonic style for this track to be as effective as it could be. I've talked about harmonic variety in previous episodes of this series, but I want to bring it up again here because as I've gone through the soundtrack in great depth, I've realized that it's one of the biggest things lacking in this soundtrack to me, and I think some small adjustments in this way could have really driven home the ideas that the composers were going for. And when I say harmonic variety, I really just mean a balance of stable and unstable ideas, or to put it even more simply, pleasant and unpleasant sounding chords. When you have a piece that's exclusively built on diminished and augmented harmony, to me the function of those chords start to lose their potency because there isn't anything familiar and approachable for the listener to juxtapose it with. And the example I've used before is how the first time you watch Star Wars, the character of Luke Skywalker is extremely important to orient the viewer and ground them to a person and a character they can understand and relate with.
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
If the main character of Star Wars was an alien from an unrelatable planet that spoke an unrecognizable language, the whole universe would feel too bizarre and surreal to connect with. So as you listen to my approach to this area, I think you'll hear that I've kept the forest much the same, but I've tried to orient it in a more understandable way. We're in the same key as the original, the same general mood and instrumentation that's focused on choir and strings, but much of the harmony has shifted to create that sense of suspense in a different way. There's a combination of different tonic chords and key centers that I use to emulate that contrast between finality and irresolution, and I alternated between two different sections to really drive that home. The opening choral bars pivot between a simple major chord and some borrowed ones, And I think you'll really hear a Metroid influence with this beginning section, almost as if this area feels like a new beginning for the game. But as the piece shifts into the B section, there's a darker approach to the tonic root with a more minor and Neapolitan focus on the rising tension and melodic voices, almost as if we're being welcomed home to the surface of ZDR, but then immediately warned of the imminent presence of the final battle. And I wanted each of these two sections to have their own sense of identity, but also within themselves present that contrast. This was a really fun one to put together, and I hope you enjoy and appreciate the interpretation. If you haven't, please consider subscribing to the channel, as it's a huge help for me to continue this project and the whole Arcade Redux channel. Please leave a comment about what you thought about the original Hanubia track and this reimagining. I'd love to get your feedback. As always, thanks for watching and enjoy this reimagining of Hanubia from Metroid Dread.